The seat was gone. Not the chair itself, the chair was still there, tucked back in at an angle the way a busboy does when he thinks no one is watching. But my place setting had been cleared. My clutch purse, the small beaded one I'd carried since my sister's wedding 30 years ago, had been moved to a windowsill ledge near the service door, like something left behind in a lost and found. I stood at the entrance of the ballroom for a moment, holding a glass of ice water I'd picked up from a passing tray, and looked at table 12 from across the room. The woman now sitting in my seat laughed at something the man beside her said. She had on a red dress. She looked comfortable. She looked like she belonged there. I didn't go back. Not to the table. Not to the dance floor where my daughter was spinning in the arms of her new husband. Not to the head table where his parents sat like they'd built the room themselves. Instead, I walked to the far side of the terrace, set my water glass on the railing, and watched the city lights come on one by one in the distance. The sun was just finishing its work. The sky had turned the color of a bruise healing at the edges. My name is Margaret Cole. I'm 63 years old, retired after 29 years as a registered nurse at St. Anthony's Medical Center. I raised my daughter alone from the time she was 9. Her father didn't leave dramatically. He just stopped coming home by degrees, the way a tide pulls back so slowly you don't notice the shore is empty until your feet are dry. I filled in what was missing the way women like me do. Packed lunches, worked overtime, learned how to fix a leaky faucet and fill out financial aid forms and sit in the dark after she fell asleep and let myself feel the full weight of it so she never had to. I'm not a woman who broadcasts her sacrifices. I keep them folded up in a drawer somewhere, not for leverage, just for memory. I know what I gave. I don't need anyone else to keep count. When my daughter told me she was getting married, I cried the right kind of tears. He seemed fine at first. Steady job, good posture, the kind of handshake that's meant to communicate something. But within a few months of them moving in together, I started noticing the small edits, the way she'd repeat his opinions back to me as if she'd arrived at them herself, the way she'd look at him before answering questions that didn't require a second opinion. I told myself it was new love. I told myself to be patient. Then they asked about the wedding. They sat across from me at my own kitchen table, the one I'd refinished the summer she turned 16, and they told me about the venue they'd found, a renovated mill building downtown, exposed brick, string lights, a catering team that did everything in-house. Beautiful, honestly. The kind of place that photographs like a dream. The number they mentioned was $41,000. His parents were covering half, they said. They had a little saved. They were hoping I could help with the rest. I did the math quietly, stirring my coffee. $14,600. I looked at my daughter. She was watching me with a careful expression, the one she used to wear when she wanted something and wasn't sure how to ask for it. Chin tilted slightly down, eyes wide. I knew that face the way I knew her voice at 2 a.m. when she had a fever. I said yes. I didn't ask for my name on the invitations. I didn't ask for a thank you in the program. I didn't ask for the centerpiece flowers to be the kind I liked. I just said yes, transferred the money in 3 installments, and helped her address 214 envelopes by hand over a long weekend in February. The wedding was in May. I want to be honest about what the day felt like, because it matters for everything that came after. I arrived early to help with setup. His mother was already there, directing the florists and reviewing the table layout with the event coordinator as if she were the one who'd written the check. She smiled at me with the warmth of someone who doesn't need anything from you. My daughter was getting her hair done upstairs. I brought her coffee the way she liked it, and we had 40 minutes together, just the two of us, before everything became noise. Those 40 minutes were the best part of the day. At the ceremony, I sat in the front row on her side and held a handkerchief I didn't end up needing. She was beautiful. She has always been beautiful. When she said her vows, her voice only broke once, and I felt it in my chest like a struck bell. The reception was where things went quiet inside me. I found my name card at table 12. It was the table nearest the kitchen entrance, tucked behind a structural column that partially blocked the view of the dance floor. I shared it with 2 of his cousins who'd flown in from out of state and spoke mostly to each other. A co-worker of his from a previous job who knew no one and an elderly aunt of someone's who spent most of the evening asleep between courses. I told myself it was an oversight. Tables get assigned quickly. Seating charts are complicated. I told myself this through the salad course and most of the entree. Then came the toasts. His best man spoke for 11 minutes. His parents were thanked by name, individually, with specific memories attached. His mother cried. The room laughed at the right moments and quieted at the right moments, and it was all very well choreographed. My son-in-law's toast to my daughter lasted 6 minutes. It was loving. Genuinely, I could see she meant everything he said. But the acknowledgments were brief. His family, their friends, their shared journey. I was not mentioned. My daughter's maid of honor spoke next. She thanked the families. She said the reception venue was stunning. She did not say who had paid for it. I smoothed the napkin in my lap and looked down at my plate. About an hour later, I stepped away to use the restroom near the back of the building, down a corridor that ran alongside the caterer's staging area. On my way back, I paused just outside the corridor entrance because I could hear my son-in-law's voice, low and easy, talking to someone I couldn't see. No, she covered most of it, he was saying. Margaret, Claire's mom. A pause. Then a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but carried the same weight. He seemed to search for the word, generous. You know how some people just can't say no. I stood very still. The other person said something I couldn't catch. She's around somewhere, he said. Table in the back, I think. I walked back to the ballroom slowly, not because I was unsteady, because I wanted the feeling to settle somewhere useful before I sat down again. When I reached table 12, my seat had been taken by the woman in the red dress. My clutch was on the windowsill. I picked it up, stood near the edge of the room for a while, and then I did something my daughter would not have expected. I smiled. Not a performance smile, not the kind women put on when they're holding something down. A real one, quiet and inward, because in that moment something clarified for me completely. I knew exactly what I was going to do. But first I was going to finish the evening with my head up. I found a spot near the bar, spoke with a few of her college friends who'd always been kind to me, danced one song by myself in a small space near the edge of the floor when something slow came on, and at the end of the night, I hugged my daughter and told her she was radiant. She hugged me back and said, "Thanks for everything, Mom." I don't think she knew how many ways that sentence landed. I drove home, changed out of my dress, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. Then I opened my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in almost 2 years. Patricia Webb. We'd met as roommates our freshman year at Ohio State. She was pre-business, I was pre-nursing, and we were both entirely too stubborn for our own good, which made us perfect friends. We stayed close through marriages and moves, and the particular silence that falls between women who are busy surviving. She'd built something remarkable over the years, a wedding and events company that now owned 5 venues across 3 cities, including, as it happened, the renovated mill building where my daughter had just gotten married. I hadn't called in a favor in 40 years of friendship. I called her the morning after the wedding. She answered on the second ring, the way she always had. I told her I was fine. I told her the wedding had been beautiful. Then I told her what happened at table 12, and what I heard in the corridor, and what I found when I came back. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Did Claire know?" she asked. "I don't think so," I said. Or she knew some of it and chose not to look directly at it. Another silence. "What do you want, Margaret?" Not unkind. Patricia has always asked the direct question. "Nothing yet," I said. "I just wanted you to know, in case it ever became relevant." She understood. Patricia has always understood things I don't finish saying. I went about my summer. I tended my garden on Saturdays. I took a watercolor class on Thursday evenings at the community center, which I'd been wanting to do for 3 years. I visited my sister in Columbus for a long weekend. I did not wait for an apology, because expecting one had started to feel like standing at a window watching for rain that might not come. My daughter called occasionally. The calls were pleasant and surface level, the kind that communicate presence without weight. I answered every time. I kept my voice warm. I did not mention the table. I did not mention the corridor. Then, in mid-August, She called to tell me they were planning an anniversary celebration for October, a small party for close friends and family at a venue they'd found. She mentioned the name of the place with the particular lightness people use when they're expecting enthusiasm. It was one of Patricia's. "Sounds wonderful," I said. "Derek thinks it'll be more intimate than the wedding," she said. "Just people who really matter." I set the phone down after we hung up and sat quietly with that sentence for a long time. The following Friday, I received a text from Patricia. Just 3 words and a period. They called, declined. I put my phone in my pocket and went out to water the tomatoes. I heard about what happened, not from my daughter, but from her friend Rosalie, who had been on the initial guest list and called me to ask if I knew anything about the venue situation. Apparently, my daughter and son-in-law had tried to book the space twice. Both times they were told, politely and firmly, that the venue was unavailable for their requested dates. When they pushed for alternative dates, they were told that, unfortunately, the venue would not be able to accommodate their event at any time. Rosalie said my son-in-law had made a second call, asking to speak to management. He was connected to someone who explained, without elaboration, that certain guests and hosts were not a match for their brand of hospitality. "Do you know what that means?" Rosalie asked. "I'm not sure," I said, which was technically accurate. My daughter called on a Sunday evening. Her voice had a texture I recognized from her teenage years, the controlled version of something that wanted to come out louder. "Did you have something to do with the venue?" she asked. I poured myself a glass of water. "Which venue?" "The Carrington, for our anniversary party. A beat. Patricia Webb owns it. You know her." "I've known Patricia since 1979, I said. "Mom," the word came out flat and deliberate. "Did you do something?" I sat down. "What makes you think I did something?" "Because you know her. Because she turned us down without explanation. Because..." She stopped. Then, more quietly, "Because I know you. And when you go quiet, it usually means something." I let the silence hold for a moment. Then I said, "I called Patricia the morning after your wedding. I told her what happened at table 12 and what I heard in the corridor." The quiet on her end was different from mine. Hers had weight to it. "What you heard was..." "I heard what I heard," I said, not with anger, just with clarity. "Derek was just... I know what he was just. I've been watching what he just does for 2 years. I kept my voice even. I'm not angry, sweetheart. I want you to understand that. I'm not calling to make you feel guilty. But I need you to hear something." She didn't speak. "I gave $14,000 to your wedding. I addressed your envelopes. I brought you coffee the morning you got married and held your hand for 40 minutes. And that night I sat at table 12, behind a column, next to people who didn't know anyone, while your husband told someone I was generous, in a tone that meant foolish." I paused. I found my purse on a windowsill. The silence stretched. "Mom, I didn't know about the table." "I believe you," I said. "I genuinely do. But you didn't ask, either." She was crying by then, quietly, the way she does when she's trying not to let it show. "I know the sound of it. I've known it since she was 4 years old." "I don't know what you want me to say," she whispered. "I don't need you to say anything tonight," I said. "I just needed you to know what it felt like. That's all I ever wanted." We stayed on the phone for another few minutes without talking much. When we said goodnight, it was careful and bruised and real in the way that things are real when the performance finally stops. 3 days later, she showed up at my door alone. No call ahead, no warning, just her car in the driveway and her face that looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. I opened the door and stepped aside. She sat in the kitchen, at the same table where we'd talked about the wedding money, and I made coffee. She wrapped her hands around the mug and stared into it the way people do when they're assembling something they don't quite know how to carry yet. "I talked to him," she said. "I waited. He said you were being oversensitive. That people say things at weddings, that it wasn't a big deal, that you should have come to us if you had a problem instead of going to Patricia." She looked up. "He's not wrong that you could have come to us." "I could have," I agreed, and I thought about it. "But I've come to the two of you before, gently, about smaller things, and each time I was told I was being too sensitive or too involved or too much. So this time I handled it quietly, She was quiet. "He thinks you're trying to punish him," she said. "I know he does." "Are you?" I thought about that honestly before I answered. I looked at my daughter, this person I built my life around for 20 years, this person who was sitting in my kitchen with tired eyes and coffee going cold in her hands, and I told her the truth. "No, I'm not trying to punish anyone." I set a boundary. "There's a difference." I folded my hands on the table. "He can think of it as punishment if he needs to. That's his frame, not mine." She pressed her lips together. Something moved across her face, not agreement, but recognition. The specific look of someone who knows a thing is true but isn't ready to say it out loud yet. The venue she started. "Patricia runs her business the way she sees fit," I said. "I can't speak to her decisions." My daughter almost smiled at that. It was small and slightly sad, but it was hers, genuine and unmistakable, and it was the first real thing that had passed between us in months. "Is that going to happen everywhere?" she asked. "Should we be worried?" I shook my head. "I'm not running a campaign. I made one call to an old friend the morning after I found my purse on a windowsill. What she does with what I tell her is her business." She nodded slowly. We sat together for a while after that, not fixing anything, just occupying the same space without armor. I refilled her coffee. She told me about a problem at her job, something about a project being reassigned, and I listened the way I always have. At some point, she mentioned that she'd looked at photos from the wedding on her phone recently and noticed I wasn't in any of the reception pictures, not a single one. She'd gone through the whole folder. "I know," I said quietly. She put her phone face down on the table. We didn't talk about him much after that. I didn't issue conditions. I didn't ask her to choose anything. That's not what love looks like. Not the kind that's meant to last. I only asked her one thing before she left. I asked her to stop repeating his opinions back to me as if they were her own. She stood up from the table slowly. She picked up her bag. And then she did something she hadn't done in what felt like years. She leaned in and hugged me the way she used to, properly, both arms, her cheek against my shoulder, like she was 9 years old and had fallen off her bike and I was the only place in the world that made sense. I held on. I didn't tell her about the full conversation I'd had with Patricia. I didn't tell her that Patricia had mentioned, gently, that she'd received 2 other accounts of my son-in-law's behavior from people in their events network. A vendor he'd spoken to dismissively, a coordinator he'd berated over a minor scheduling error. I didn't tell her that Patricia had made her decision based on a pattern, not a single call from an old friend. I didn't tell her because that story wasn't mine to carry for her. She'd find her own way to the truth, or she wouldn't, and either way, it would be hers. After she left, I walked to the garden and stood there in the late afternoon light, the way I do when I need to think without thinking. The tomatoes were finally turning. The lavender along the fence had gone full and purple. Somewhere down the block, a child was riding a bicycle and calling out to someone I couldn't see. I thought about the night of the wedding, standing at the railing with my water glass, watching the city lights come on. How empty that felt, and how still I stayed inside it. How I'd known, even then, that the stillness wasn't resignation. It was the feeling of a decision forming. I've spent a long time in my life being easy to overlook. Not because I'm weak, I know I'm not weak, but because I never made noise about what I gave. And some people interpret that as permission to keep taking. They see the quiet, and they mistake it for a door that's always unlocked. I paid for the wedding, every cent. And I would do it again, because I did it for my daughter. Not for credit, not for a seat at the front of the room, not to be thanked in a microphone speech. I did it because she is mine, and I am hers. And that math has never changed. But I also made one phone call the morning after I found my purse on a windowsill, because I've learned, finally, at 63, that there's no virtue in absorbing everything quietly if it leaves you invisible. Self-respect isn't the same as pride. It doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need an audience. But it does need to be real, private and certain and non-negotiable. The kind that doesn't require anyone else's awareness to exist. I keep a photo now on the kitchen windowsill. It's from those 40 minutes the morning of the wedding, just the 2 of us, her hair half done, coffee in her hand, laughing at something I'd said. Rosalie took it on her phone and sent it to me a week after. Neither of us is looking at the camera. We're looking at each other. That's the one I kept. Have you ever paid a price that no one acknowledged? Have you ever done something large and quiet and found yourself wondering if you were foolish for not demanding to be seen? I think about that a lot lately, and I keep coming back to the same answer. The doing of it was never the foolish part. The foolish part is staying small forever after, as if that's the only shape you're allowed to take. If you've been sitting at table 12 somewhere in your own life, I want you to know something. The table doesn't define you, and you don't have to make noise to matter. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply, quietly, stop pretending the table was ever good enough.